Cinder de la Dune summons the Shadow Fiends. Chapter 6. It had been a quiet night. Someone had called in a fruitless report of vandalism at Pleasant View Cemetery, and there had been one traffic stop resulting in a warning for a busted tail light. But overall, the streets of Gobbler's Knob were deserted, and Deputy Henrik sipped coffee from a paper cup as he steered the cruiser with his left hand. Leaning forward, the policeman peered over his steering wheel at the sky above. There were no twinkling stars, no glow of moonlight filtering through the clouds. In fact, the heavens looked like a black dome devoid of even the faintest illumination. But then lightning flickered and flashed, silhouetting the edges of the thunderheads as it raced across the sky. With the clouds backlit by electrical discharge, Henrik could now see how heavy and pendulous they actually were. Fat drops of rain began spattering against the cruiser's windshield, and thunder drowned out the crackle of the radio as his eyes darted from the deserted road to the sky and back again. Gonna get bad, he thought. Could open up in any second. He knew the most dangerous part of any storm was during the first 10 minutes. Even a slight drizzle would mix with oils on the road, making it slippery and hazardous. He was still razzed about the time he'd backed the cruiser into a retaining wall, and that minor fender bender had happened nearly a year ago. So he considered slowing down, but his coffee was tepid and bitter. With the station house less than 2 miles away, the promise of a fresh cup was like a beacon in the night. If the storm held off a few minutes longer, he'd be safe and dry before the downpour really began. So instead of reducing speed, the officer actually applied a little more pressure to the gas. The dazzling display sparking between the clouds was almost hypnotic, pulling Deputy Henrik's gaze skyward time and time again. As his patrol car zipped through an intersection, he caught movement in his peripheral vision. It was nothing more than a large blur barreling down upon him, but it was enough for his foot to reflexively stomp the brake pedal as he jerked the steering wheel to the right. The car fishtailed over rain-slick asphalt as Deputy Henrik tried to correct his course. However, there simply wasn't enough time. The front of the cruiser slammed into a telephone pole, whipping the officer's head forward as a deep thud reverberated through the car. His forehead bounced off the steering wheel as coffee flew into the air. He sat there for a moment, feeling as though the crash had jarred his soul from his body. He watched steam billow and hiss from the crumpled front end through a webwork of cracks that appeared on the windshield, and blinked like a man who had just awoken from a dream. Catching his own reflection in the rearview mirror, he noticed the knot already swelling in his forehead, the dull glaze in his eyes, and how his skin seemed more sunken and pallid than he remembered. He wasn't sure if the crash had broken the headlights or if the antifreeze spewing through the ruptured radiator had shorted them out, but the darkness surrounding the car was not lost on him. In fact, it seemed darker than could simply be explained by lack of high beams. The telephone pole leaned over his cruiser at an angle, but he looked past it, searching the night for porch lights or lit windows. Yet there was nothing. That's just fucking great. I must have knocked out the power to this whole damn side of town. The thought snapped the man out of the worst of his stupor, and he flicked the lever which turned on the blue and red lights atop his patrol car. With his forehead throbbing, Deputy Henrik then opened the cruiser's door and practically spilled onto the concrete as a wave of vertigo washed over him. By this time, the rain was coming down so steadily that it sounded like a constant hiss of radio static, and for some reason, this made Deputy Henrik wonder about the blur of movement which had caused him to slam on the brakes to begin with. Looking up, he thought he saw a crowd of silhouettes surrounding him, but the figures blinked in and out of reality, seeming only to exist in the split seconds of complete darkness between his strobing lights. Red, darkness, blue, darkness, red, darkness. Each time, the silhouettes seemed a little closer than they had been before. Each time, he staggered a step backwards. It never occurred to him that the apparitions might be hallucinations brought about by head trauma. The primal instinct for survival told him they were real. It also told him they were not friendly. It told him to unholster his weapon, and it told him to open fire. Cinder de la Dune watched fire lick from the end of the pistol as the sound of the shots were drowned in a clap of thunder. Deputy Hendrick's aim was true, but the bullets passed through the Shadow Fiends harmlessly, shattering shop windows as the wayward bullets destroyed televisions and mannequins alike. But then the creatures were all over him, swarming and writhing, disappearing and reappearing as the lights on his cruiser continued to cycle. Red. Deputy Hendricks thrashed and threw back his head, screaming in the rain. Darkness. The shadows obscured the officer completely, shifting forms and blurring erratically. Blue. Skin and clothing alike ripped and shredded, patches of raw flesh glistening in the night as the man dropped to his knees. Darkness. The feeding frenzy continued, and Cinder pressed the palms of her hand against her mouth, wanting to look away, yet powerless to do so. Red. Deputy Hendricks was mostly skeletal now, his bones toppling to the side as the young girl watched in horror. Darkness. With the flurry past, the Shadow Fiends formed a wall of darkness along Doe Lane. Though the young girl couldn't discern any features, she knew each and every one was staring directly at her. Their attention burrowed into her chest like a shot of anesthetic, a sharp sting of pain followed by a radiating numbness. These creatures would enter her house. They would devour her parents and her brother, just as they had Deputy Hendricks. Within the span of seconds, everyone she'd ever loved would be dead and fleshless, and it would all be her fault. Wilhelmina Blackthorn had planted the seed, but Cinder had been the one to nurse it. It had been her decision to go to the graveyard that night. It had been her choice to flee from the mausoleum the moment things started getting a little hairy. And now Deputy Hendricks was dead, as would be her family. She'd started this entire ordeal, and she knew it was up to her to stop it. The problem was, she didn't know how. That fact, however, didn't stop the young girl from sliding her window open for the second time that night. Nor did it prevent her from running out into the cold rain as lightning cracked the sky overhead. The Shadow Fiends wanted her. She knew this, just as she knew they would pursue her no matter where she went. So the important thing was to lead them away from her house, from the town itself, actually. There was already enough blood on her hands as it was, and anyone who tried to help her would undoubtedly meet the same fate as Deputy Hendrick. So, Cinder reasoned, the best thing to do would be to return to where it all began. A place where she would be the only living creature around. And if she were lucky, maybe she'd live to see morning. Well, first the stray cat, and now Deputy Hendrick. And apparently maybe Cinder too. It's very brave of the little girl to lure them away from her house, but what chance does she have against them? She has no weapons. Nothing to fight with. It doesn't look good for her. It doesn't look good at all. And perhaps tomorrow night when we tackle Chapter 7, we will learn the fate of little Cinder. Or perhaps not. Good night.